All right, I will say good morning, good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Beis. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this month in honor of those who put together the beautiful groundbreaking and those who work on behalf of the shul each and every day. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors today, an anonymous sponsorship for the refuah shleimah of Leah Tziporah bas Chana and the Klibanoff family in honor of the harbotzas HaTorah accomplished through this year. We'll say we thank all of our sponsors for their generosity and for their dedication. And with that, Emiras Hashem, let us begin. Today's daf is Daf Dalid. Daf Dalid. We are picking up on Gimel Amud Beis. A lot of incredible Gemara to do today. 3b. And also we left off about 18 lines up from the bottom. Mikan Amru. No, actually, I'm sorry. Right after Yachol. It's actually right across from Tosus Yachol. So it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Oh, it is 18 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, remember again, right? 8 lines up from the bottom across from Tosus Yachol. So remember again, yesterday we spent our time really focused on establishing first the structure of the Mishnah, but then afterwards we did an incredibly important piece where essentially we learned the basis of this halacha. When I say this halacha, number one, really it's a 3-part halacha. Part 1, that a man can't do yibum with a woman who is an erva. That's part 1. Part 2 is that when there is an erva, she is not only exempted from yibum, but ultimately she exempts her tzara, her co-wife. And part 3, which is not only is the co-wife exempted, but what we call the tsaras tzara. The co-wife of the co-wife is exempted as well. And I both say all of that, amazingly enough, is learned out from the prohibition of achos isha. The prohibition of going out and marrying one's wife's sister. Everything is derived ultimately from that halacha. So says the Gemara, let's go back to Yachol Shani Marbeh, Af Sheish Arayos Chamuros Me'elu. I might have thought that maybe the list of 15 should grow, and perhaps another 6 women should be added on. Now both say, who are these 6 women? The 6 women we're going to see in a later Mishnah, the Mishnah on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, in about 10 days from now, or 9 days from now, we'll see. These are 6 additional relatives who are relatives from the husband's father's side, paternal relatives. And I will say, you might have thought that we should include these additional 6 women, Shiutzarosehem Asuros, and ultimately again, these women are usher to the Yavam, ultimately again because they are related to him on his father's side. You would have thought that the same halachos, they should also usher their co-wives and their co-wives as well, to which the Gemara says, we say no. Amrit, ma achos ishto miyuchedes. I will say, now remember again, the reason why this doesn't really get off the ground, although the Gemara is going to go through the process, is because remember, anyone who is paternally related to the Yavam is also paternally related to who? All of his brothers. So by definition, this becomes an impossible yibum situation. So remember again, we saw it alluded to in the Mishnah, but we have not yet actually seen where this is that yibum only applies to brothers who are related paternally. I mean, of course, paternally and maternally also, but there has to be a paternal relationship. Ki yeshu achim yachdav. Has to be brothers, ultimately, again, who are related paternally. So therefore, again, the Gemara doesn't go through these additional 6 women, but these 6 women are prohibited to the yavam through a paternal relationship. So ultimately, again, that means that they're prohibited to the brothers as well. But you might have thought that nevertheless, the same way these women are asuros, that their tsaros, their co-wives should be asuros as well. Amrit, we said no. Remember again, what we established also yesterday was a paradigm. What did we say yesterday? Ma achos ishtam yuchades shi erva v'chayav don kares v'ashigagas achatos. Remember again, in the case of achos ishto, the sister of one's wife, what are the qualities of that relationship? Number 1, she's an erva. Number two, intentional relations with her bring with it a chi of kares. Unintentional, ultimately bring a chi of chatos. But afsher linase la'achim. See, I will say, the case of achos ishto, of one's wife's sister, she is permitted to the Yavam's brothers. right? Remember again, the only prohibition to marry a wife's sister is on the man who's married to the sister. But Lamaisa, to all the other brothers, she is permitted. Vasru liyavam, but yet she's usher to the yavam. V'tsarasa asura, and therefore she goes ahead and prohibits her co-wives. Afkol, so that creates a paradigm. Afkol, she erva, v'chayavan al zadona kares, v'al shigagasa chatos, v'efsher linase la'achim v'asura liyavam, tsarasa asura. Yatsu sheish arayos chamuros me'elu, hoil di afshar linase la'achim, tsarosehem mutaros, she'in tsara ela me'ach. So I'll say, okay, I just read a lot there. Let's translate this. We'll say it's a very simple cheshbon. The Gemara says, we're establishing what we'll call paradigms. In halacha, paradigms are called the binyan av. We're establishing paradigms. And remember again, what the Mishnah has established for us is a paradigm that looks like this. If you have a woman, like we just said before, who is an erva, she cannot do yibam with the yavam. And if she can't do yibam with the yavam because of an erva situation, not only can't she do yibam, but who else can't do yibam? Her co-wife, her tzara, and again the tzaras, which I will say again. Remember, just to refresh everyone's, because we're talking about it a lot. Go back to the chart from the first day. Let's just take a quick look again at the tzara case, just so everyone remembers. If you take a look again at chart A, I will say this is the bottom line of chart A. So remember again, if we just go through this quickly, Ruvain, starting from the top of table A, Ruvain is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. Rachel is Shimon's daughter. Ruvain dies, therefore Rachel and Leah technically fall to Yibum to Shimon. Shimon, however, can't do Yibum with Rachel because Rachel is his daughter. Erva. Once Shimon can't do Yibum with Rachel, the Erva, he also can't do Yibum with Leah, the co-wife. That's the case of Tsaras Erva. Co-wife of an Erva. No problem. Go down to the second box in table A. So what happens, Rabosai? So Leah goes ahead and does Yibum with Levi, right? Another surviving brother. Now what happens? So Rabosai, so remember again, Leah is what we call the Tsaras Erva, the co-wife of an Erva. So Leah does Yibum with Levi. Now what happens? Levi dies. Now we'll say Levi has two wives, Leah, who was the Tsaras Erva, and Miriam. You might have thought that Miriam, right, or perhaps again one of these women would be able to marry Shimon now, but no. Since Leah is a Tsaras Erva, Miriam becomes a Tsaras Sara, the co-wife of a co-wife, and therefore again, once again, Shimon can't do Yibum with either of these women. Okay, that's just to refresh yourself with the case, because we're constantly referencing it. So I will say, so therefore again, now that everything is learned out from Achos Ishto, remember again, this becomes Achos Ishto, becomes the paradigm, becomes the binyan av for this entire halacha. So I will say, what's the paradigm established by Tzaras Ishto? The case of an erva, but I will say, what kind of erva? Remember, let's assume right now, by the way, that we're talking about, pull out the chart just once more. Just let's illustrate it with this chart. It's very easy. On A, so we'll see you have three brothers, Shimon, Ruvain, and Levi. And let's just keep this very simple. So Ruvain is married to, right, Rachel and Leah. And just for our purposes right now, let's assume Rachel is the sister of Shimon's wife. Shimon has another wife. Rachel is the sister of Shimon's wife. That's the case of Achos Ishto. Then I will say, in that case, in that paradigm of Achos Ishto, from which all of these halachos are being gleaned, ultimately, Rachel is usher to Shimon. Again, why is she usher to Shimon? Why? Because she is the sister of his wife. Who is she permitted to? Levi. Right? She's permitted to all the other brothers. Right? So this is, remember, the case of Achos Ishto is where the erva situation only is problematic for one of the brothers, but is not problematic for all of the other brothers. But if halacha l'maisa, you have an erva situation that is problematic for all of the brothers. So again, no one has it's problematic for all of the brothers. Then ultimately, again, the paradigm doesn't kick in. So where the erva is only problematic for one brother, like Achos Ishto, that's when the paradigm kicks in, and the paradigm says the erva is aser, the co-wife of the erva is aser, and the tzara, the co-wife of the co-wife is aser. But I was saying, if you have a case where the woman in question is what we'll call a paternal erva, and therefore, again, she's usher to all of the brothers. The rest of the paradigm simply doesn't kick in. That's all the Gemara is saying. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. So we'll say this is a really exciting Gemara. Azhara shamanu. So we'll say now I know about the prohibition. So okay, now I got it. I understand it. Why I understand the prohibition? What's the prohibition? You can't do yibum with an erva, right? Number one, can't do yibum with the co-wife of an erva. Number two, and you can't do yibum with the saras tsara, the co-wife of an erva. Good, I got it. Azhara. Onesh minayin. We'll say, what's the punishment? What's the punishment, right? Because remember, I'm going to say, you know this, that in halacha, so any time that something is aser, there's two components to the iser. There's the actual prohibition, and then there's the punishment, what we call the azhara, which is the lav, the prohibition, and the onesh, the punishment. So the azhara, the prohibition, we just saw before, isha lachosa losikach litzror legalos ervasa aleha bechayeha. That's the azhara. What's the onesh? What's the punishment? To which the Gemara says, Amar Kra, ki kol ish asher yasa mikol hatoivos. Because the pasuk says, any man who engages in any of these abominable acts, v'nichresu hanefashos haosos mikarav alam. Kares, that is the punishment for going ahead and engaging in these relationships. Now, I say, get ready for this sugya. Get ready for this. Taima de kasev rachmana aleha. So I'll say, so remember again, how did we get from the prohibition of achos ishto, which is just a straightforward prohibition, ultimately of marrying your wife's sister, how did we get to that, to the whole, and apply this to the whole yibum scenario? Remember again, one word. What was the one word? Aleha. Aleha created a gzera shava between the prohibition of achos ishto and yibum, because the Torah uses the same word aleha in both contexts. So watch this. Time at the kasav rachmana aleha halav hachi. Had the Torah not used the word aleha, hava amina achos isham Yevamos. Rabbi say, let's take a step back here for just a moment. Had the Torah not used the word aleha, right, which created a gzera shava between achos ishto and yibum, Rabbi say, what would I have thought regarding doing yibum with the wife of my sister? What would I have thought? Just logically, what would I have thought? It's mutter. Why would I have thought that? Because we'll say, remember again, my wife's sister is no worse than my brother's wife. And if I'm allowed to marry my brother's wife in a situation of yibum, remember we'll say, the whole chiddush of yibum is that the concept of yibum permits a relationship which was otherwise prohibited. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife. Right? You're not allowed to. Yet yibum says you're allowed to. It's a mitzvah. So we'll say, so if yibum allows that forbidden relationship, I would have thought in general, yibum allows for you to marry someone who would otherwise be prohibited to me. So we'll say, what the Gemara is just suggesting over here is, without the word aleha, which creates a halachic bridge, a gzera shava, between achos ishto and yibum, I would have thought I would be allowed to do yibum with my wife's sister, because again, yibum in general allows for a relationship which was otherwise prohibited. So we'll say, now watch this. My timer. Now I will say, now what's the reason why I would have thought that halacha l'maisa, I can marry my wife's sister for a situation of yibum? It's very simple. Da'aminon asay, v'dachi lo saseh. So exciting. I will say, why? Why? Because listen to this, I would have thought it's very simple. I will say, asay dochi lo saseh. A positive commandment sets aside a prohibition. This is a halachic principle. We're going to see where it comes from in just a moment. But there's a halachic principle. Asay doche lo saseh. Sefer Rabbi say again. And what? So therefore, in Yibum, let's play this out. So again, just Rabbi say, let's just keep using. We're just going to keep referencing this sheet, right? Same table A. Reuven passes away. He leaves two wives, Rachel and Leah. Shimon is married to Rachel's sister. So Rabbi say, without the Gzera Shava of Aleha, I would assume that Shimon should marry Rachel, even though Rachel is Shimon's present wife's sister. Why? Asi asay v'dache lo saseh. There's an asay of Yibum, and the asay of Yibum should go ahead and set aside the lo saseh, the prohibition of marrying one's wife's sister. To which the Gemara says, one second. Lo sase greda. Lo sase sheish bo kares midachi. So first all says Gemara, so hold on here for just a moment. Perhaps I would have thought, when do we say that an asay could set aside a lo sase? When do we say that? That's what we'll call, we'll say, with a relatively low-grade lo sase. What's an example of a low-grade lo sase? Anything that has like a chiyuv malchus with it. We'll give examples of that in just a moment. But when you have a lo sase that has a chiyuv kares, I don't know that we would say that an asay, that a positive commandment could come along and set that aside. I don't know that makes sense. And I also remember again, when you come to arayas, you're talking about death penalties. You're talking about kares. Eshes, right? Achos ishto is a situation of kares. So who says that asay is docha lo sasay? Furthermore, the Gemara says, V'su, lo sasay greda minon dedachi. Both say this is incredible. Furthermore, says the Gemara, how do you know that asay is docha lo sasay? In other words, from where do we know that? Both say top of Daled. This is such an incredible sugya, both with halacha and hashkafa, which we'll get to. Tichsev, it's very simple because the pasuk says, "Lo silbash shatnis gedilim tasalach." It will say, because the pasuk says, juxtaposes two psukim. It will say both of them in Devarim. Torah says, do not wear shatnis. Lo silbash shatnis semer ufishtim yachtov. Don't wear shatnis, wool and linen together. And I will say, in the very next pasuk, what does it say? Gedilim ta'aselach al arba kanfos ksuscha. Tzitzis. Right? And I will say, what's the halacha with tzitzis? Tzitzis is permitted to be shatnis. Then I will say, so interested, take a look at Rashi. Lo silba shatnis, v'samach le gedilim ta'aselach, v'darshinim smuchin, v'sharinan kelayim b'tzitzis, al ma'asi aseh v'dacha lo saseh. So also, I just want to point out over here, there's actually two pieces to this drasha. This is so exciting. There's two pieces to this drasha. I will say, first of all, the concept of aseh docha lo saseh comes from these two psukim. The Torah says, don't wear shatnis, and then it says, but do wear tzitzis. And from here we learn that tzitzis could be shatnis. So we'll say, I could have a baguette, it's a baguette of tzitzis, right? My tzitzis garment is made of linen, and my tzitzis could be made of wool, or vice versa. That is permitted. That I will say, now that presupposes another halachic principle, which is darshinon smuchin. That we darshin juxtaposed psukim. And we assume that when the Ribono Shel Olam put certain psukim together, he did it intentionally for us to learn certain things. Right? So therefore, again, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes out of his way, so to speak, to go ahead and juxtapose the pasuk of shatnis with the pasuk of tzitzis, it's to teach us that although there's a prohibition of shatnis, you can't wear wool and linen together, you can wear tzitzis, which are shatnis. So that's darshin and smuchin. We learn that from the juxtaposition. And what we darshin from that is what? Asay doche lo sasay. Positive commandment has the ability to be doche, a prohibition. So Gemara says, V'am Rabbi Allah. We'll say very exciting. We'll say this is like a yesod, right? You're learning Gemara like this, and this is a Shas Gemara. V'am Rabbi Allah says, smuchin min haTorah minayin. So also, first of all, Rabbi Allah says, how do you know that you darshin smuchin? Right? How do you know that you darshan juxtapositions? That juxtapositions are meaningful. Shnei Amar, they both say, it's interesting, quotes over here, a beautiful passage from Tehillim, Smuchim la'ad li'olam asuyim be'emes v'yashar. So I will say, it's actually interesting. How do you know you darshan smuchim? It's interesting, quotes a passage from Tehillim, right? Which is just fascinating. I will say, the real answer, how do you know that you darshan smuchim? I will say, the concept of darshan smuchim has to be a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. In other words, you can't start darshaning psukim based on a beautiful poetic pasuk in Tehillim. The real answer is that smuchin has to be one of the exegetical principles. What the Gemara is saying is, do you have a pasuk that kind of references this dynamic? To which the Gemara says, yes, beautiful pasuk in Tehillim, literally again, smuchim li'ad li'olam, they are juxtaposed, they are together for all eternity, asuyim be'emes v'yashar. They ultimately, again, are crafted with emes and are yashar. V'amrav sheishes amrav belazar, mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, minayim li'yevama. So also listen to this, another great case, we're going to see this case. Minayim li'yevama, she nafla lifnei muka shchin, shein chos minosa. I want to listen to this. How do we know? And we're going to talk about this case. We'll say, let's say you have a Yevama, and a woman. This is the widow, and the widow falls to a brother. Right, both say the lashon of yibum is falling. Right, she falls to the yavam. She falls in front of her brother-in-law, and the guy is mukashchin. They always say mukashchin literally means covered with boils. In other words, the brother-in-law is physically repulsive to the widow. So how do we know that if the widow finds her brother-in-law, the yavam, physically repulsive, that ultimately she'ein chosmin osa? They both say in chosmin osa literally means what? That we don't muzzle her. That we don't muzzle her means we don't stifle her objections to marrying him, and we strongly encourage the yavam to do chalitza. Right? If the woman doesn't want to marry the yavam, right, we ain't chosmin. We don't muzzle her, right? We don't silence her. We hear her objections and we tell the yavam, do chalitza. We'll say, look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, she'in chosmin, ein sosmin ta'anoseh lekofa le'esya be'im lo, elakofin oso v'choletz. We force him. We force him to do chalitza. So we'll say, how do we know? Listen to this. Shina Emar. This is fascinating. Lo sachsum sharbedisho. Because we'll say the pasuk says you should not muzzle an ox when it threshes. We'll say very interesting halacha. When the ox is threshing, you shouldn't muzzle it. Right? Why not? Because we'll say that's considered to be cruel and unusual punishment to the ox. Right? When an ox threshes, it's supposed to be able to eat while it works. So if you muzzle it, right, that's considered to be tzar balei chayim. So the Torah says, right, mistreating of animals. So the Torah says, lo sachsam sharbedisha. And I will say, here's what's interesting. What's the next pasuk, right? What's the pasuk right next to it? The pasuk right next to it is, ki yeshvu achim yachtov. The pasuk of Yibum. The pasuk of Yibum. So I will say, so once again, it's that's darshinon smuchin. They're darshaning juxtaposed psukim. That there are some times in a Yibum scenario where we don't muzzle the woman, so to speak, right? She has an objection to marrying this man. We don't muzzle, we don't silence her, but rather we hear her objections and ultimately go ahead and tell the Yavam to do chalitza. Incredible. For Rav Yosef, afil lemandalo darish smuchin ba'alma. Now we'll say this whole concept of darshin and smuchin is in and of itself a machlokes. Not everyone darshin smuchin, right? In other words, it's interesting, I will say, because obviously there are certain exegetical principles that everyone agrees with, right? In other words, everyone agrees with the concept of a kal v'chomer, and everyone agrees with the concept of gzeir shava. It's interesting to note that when it comes to the concept of darshinon smuchin, do we darshin juxtapositions? There is machlokes about that. It's really fascinating to see. There's a machlokes. Do we darshin smuchin or not? So here's what's fascinating. Even according to the opinions who hold that you don't darshan smuchin, the Mishnah Torah darish. We do darshan smuchin in Dvarim. I would say Dvarim is called Mishnah Torah, right? Why is Dvarim called Mishnah Torah? Mishnah Torah literally means a second or a review, because most of Chumash Dvarim, right? The essence of Chumash Dvarim is a review of that which occurred before. All of Chumash Dvarim occurs with Klal Yisrael standing at Ever Hayarden, right by the Transjordanian area, and it's Moshe Rabbeinu's farewell speech to all of Klal Yisrael. So says Gemara something amazing, that Rabbi Yosef says that even if you don't normally darshan smuchin, in Dvarim, everyone darshan smuchin. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, B'mishnah Torah darish. Daha, Rabbi Yehuda ba'amalo darish, because let's take Rabbi Yehuda as an example. Rabbi Yehuda normally does not darshan smuchin, or B'mishnah Torah darish, but by Mishnah Torah, by Dvarim, he does. U'ba'ama minal v'lo darish. How do you know that in general Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan smuchin? This Sanya ben Azai Omer. Now listen to this. We're going to show now that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan smuchin. How do you see? Watch this. Ben Azai. So the Sanya ben Azai Omer. Ben Azai says as follows: Ne'amar mechashefa lo sechaya. The Torah says you have to kill a machashefa. Who's a machashefa? A sorceress. Right? Torah says you're not allowed to. You are not permitted to allow the machashefa to live. V'ne'emar kol shochev im behema mos yumas. And the next pasuk says, whoever goes ahead and commits an act of bestiality, right, is also put to death. So the Gemara says, samchu inyan lo. Then I will say, here's what's interesting. It is fascinating to see that the prohibition of bestiality is juxtaposed to the prohibition of sorcery. So the Gemara says, so Ben Azai says, ma shochev in behema beskila Af machashefa beskila. Both say, what's the nature of the juxtaposition? It's very simple. It's to teach me. Just like bestiality is punished by skila, by stoning, so too again, sorcery is going to be punished by stoning as well. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda. Both say, Amar le Rabbi Yehuda. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda. V'chi mipnei shesamchu inyan lo notzi zel skila. Rabbi Yehuda says, what? Because the psukim are juxtaposed, you're going to go ahead and kill this guy with skila? That doesn't make any sense. Look at Rashi will say, no tzizeh mechashek. So just because the prohibition of sorcery is juxtaposed to bestiality, you're going to go ahead and kill the sorcerer with skila? I will say, now interestingly enough, Rashi says over here, what's Rabbi Yehuda's objection to skila? And I will say, let's be clear. Is Rabbi Yehuda disagreeing that the machashefa is subject to a death penalty? No. Right? Rabbi Yehuda is bothered by skila. Now, who cares? Like at the end of the day, you're going to kill the guy. What does it matter? It matters to give Rashi skila shimisa chamura mikulan. But remember, we saw this in yesterday's daf that there's a machlokes. What is considered to be the most stringent death penalty? Is it skila or is it sreifa? Yesterday's daf we saw reference to the fact that it's sreifa. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's skila, and Rabbi Yehuda says to impose the most severe death penalty upon an individual when it's not warranted is wrong. Therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, I don't understand. Just because the prohibition of kishuf is juxtaposed to the prohibition of bestiality, you're going to kill the mechashev, you're going to kill the sorcerer? That doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara says, Ella, so what is the punishment for the sorcerer? In other words, Torah doesn't say, all the Torah says is, you can't allow the machashefa to live. Okay, how am I killing them? Says the Gemara, Ella, ovi yedoni, bichlam mechashem. We'll say, rather watch this. Now remember, the prohibition of, or I should say the statement of mechashefa lo sechaya, don't allow the mechashefa to live, we will say that is an all-encompassing pasuk, right? That includes all forms of kishuf. So the Gemara says, listen to this, so Ovi Yedoni are included. And remember, Ovi and Yedoni are types of necromancers, right? They go ahead and they speak to the dead, either through bones or actually one of them through their armpit, right? That's how Ovi Yedoni operate. So Ovi Yedoni were included in the general statement of Kol Mechashefa Lo Sechaya. But yet, they're pulled out and they are spoken about separately. So watch this. So Ela Ovi Yedoni Bechlal Mechashvim Hayu. Ov and Yedoni were in the general group of Mechashvim. V'lama Yotzu. Why were they pulled out? Why are they mentioned specifically on their own? Lahakish lahem v'lomar lach. To go ahead and teach you the following. Ma'ov v'Yedoni b'skila, af machashefa b'skila. I will say to teach us a very important principle. Just like Ov and Yedoni ultimately again are punishable by skila, so too machashefa is punished by skila. So Rabbi say by Ovi Yedoni, ultimately again we know that it is a punishment of skila. So Rabbi say, so essentially, this is a concept ultimately of something that was included in a klal and then removed from the klal. So Ovi Yedoni were included in the general pasuk of machashefa. They're pulled out of the pasuk of machashefa. The Torah tells us that Ovi Yedoni are killed through skila, and from there we learn to all other forms of sorcery that they're executed by skila as well. Incredible. So we'll say, but what's the point over here? You see that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan smuchin. Now remember, what did Rav Yosef say before? Rav Yosef said that even those who don't darshan smuchin, right, in the rest of Torah, will darshan smuchin where? In Chumash Devarim, in Mishnah Torah. So I will say, so ultimately, and I will say, now I just want to point out, okay, in Mishnah Torah. So, Mishnah Torah, Minal and Darish, and by the way, so where do you see this? Show me. Where do you see that even a Rabbi Yehuda, who doesn't darshan smuchin in the rest of Torah, does darshan smuchin in Mishnah Torah? This nan, because we learned, no se adam anusas aviv, umefutas aviv. Well, see, this is a very interesting case. A person could marry the woman violated by his father or seduced by his father. Anusa means violated, right? Mefuta means seduced. So if one's father violated or seduced a woman, the son is permitted to go ahead and marry that woman. So the Gemara says, Anusas bino, umufutas bino. Similarly, a man could marry a woman who was violated by his son or seduced by his son. Rabbi Yehuda oser ba'anusas aviv umufutas aviv. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, says that halacha l'maisa. Now, we'll say, now what's the chiddush in this, by the way? Take a look at Rashi. No se adam anusas aviv, shelo ne'esra, alav olamis ela eshes aviv. Because we will say the only prohibition is one's father's wife. One's father's wife. That's the prohibition. So the Havamina is, you might have thought that these women, right, the one who was violated by the father or seduced by the father, maybe have like a quasi-wife identity. Kamash Malon, no. Kamash Malon, again, it's only Eishes Aviv that is problematic. Similarly, again, Anusas Beno, Lav Kalasu. Similarly, again, I will say, a man is not permitted to go ahead and marry his daughter-in-law. So you might have thought that, again, maybe the daughter-in-law status even applies to a woman who was violated or seduced by the son. Kamash Malon, not. Kamash Malon, I will say, the first opinion says that Allah Khalamaisa, a man could marry a woman seduced by his father, violated by his father, seduced by his son, violated by his son. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says no. No. Ba'anusas aviv umafutas aviv. So Rabbi Yehuda says a man is not permitted to marry a woman who was seduced by his father or violated by his father. Now why is that? My time in Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda's logic? Dichsev lo yikach ish es eshes aviv v'lo yigale knaf aviv. The pasuk says a man is not permitted to take the wife of his father, nor may he, listen to this lashon, lo yigale knaf aviv. He may not literally reveal, it's literally translated, reveal the corner or uncover the corner of his father. Now, the pashtus, what that means is he can't uncover the corner of his father's garment. Now, what does that mean? To which Rabbi Yehuda darshans, kinaf shera aviv lo yigala. I will say, essentially, any nakedness that his father has seen, the son is not permitted to uncover. So Rabbi Yehuda darshans over here that pretty much any woman with whom the father has had relations, the son is not permitted to marry. And therefore, again, even the case of anusas aviv, mufutas aviv, the woman violated by the father, seduced by the father, ultimately, again, the son is not permitted to marry. Okay. Umimai diba anusa ksiv. And I will say, that's interesting. Okay, and I hear the drasha, but how do you know that lo yikach ishes aviv? I will say, so again, understand what Rabbi Yehuda is doing. Rabbi Yehuda is saying in that pasuk there's two things. Lo yikach ishes aviv. A man can't marry his father's wife. Now, obviously, in the chiddush of that pasuk is not talking about one's own mother, right? Because one's own mother is obvious erva. This is talking about, again, a father married someone who's not my mother, right? So again, halacha l'maisa. So number one, the Torah says you cannot go ahead and marry that woman even after your father divorces her or your father dies. That's number one. The second part of the pasuk is lo yigale knaf aviv. So Rabbi Yehuda is understanding that to mean essentially, any woman who has seen one's father's nakedness, right? Ultimately, in other words, anyone with whom the father has had relations, the son cannot marry. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, how do you know to darshan it that way? And how do you know that it's referring ultimately again to a woman who the father seduced or to a woman who the father violated? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you, Rabbi Yehuda says, so the Gemara says, ultimately, again, says the Gemara, says Rabbi Yehuda, look at the earlier pasuk. What does the earlier pasuk say? V'nasan ha'ish hashochiv ima la'avia na'ara chamishim kesef. They will say the earlier pasuk talks about the halacha of a man violating a woman. So ultimately, Rabbi Yehuda says, look at the juxtaposition of the psukim. Torah speaks out the halachas of a man violating a woman, and right after it says, you shall not uncover the corner of your father's garment. Rabbi Yehuda says, smuchin, we dash in the juxtaposition, and halacha l'maisa, it's referring ultimately again to a woman violated or seduced by the father. Incredible. So says, what do you see? Rabbi Yehuda darshans smuchin. Where are these psukim located? Chumash Devarim, Mishnah Torah. See, even those who don't darshan smuchin in the general Torah, Bereishis Shmos Vayikra Bamidbar, will darshan smuchin in Devarim. To which the Gemara says, "V'samechlei lo yikachish." So we'll say, "What do the Rabbanon do with this?" And I will say, and I remember again, the Rabbanon who seemingly do darshan, smuchin, right? What do they do with this? Very simple. Iha v'samechlei kidika amrit. Hashtag the lo samechlei dichsiv lo yikach ishes aviv beintayim b'shomeres yavam hakasav medaber So it's okay, let's take this back for just a second. Why don't the Rabbanon agree with Rabbi Yehuda? Because also remember again, the Rabbanon hold that a man is permitted to marry a woman who was violated by his father, right? Or seduced by his father. Why? Because also I want to point out, these psukim are not exactly juxtaposed. Right? In other words, they don't consecutively flow one right after the other. There is a phrase in between. Also, remember again, you have the pasuk that says, right, about the prohibition of violating a woman and the penalty for violating a woman. Right after that, the Torah says, "Lo yikach ish es aviv." A man may not marry his father's wife, and then it says, "For lo yigale knaf aviv." You can't uncover the father's nakedness. You can't uncover the corner of his garment. So Rabbi say, the Rabbanan will say, how does smuchin work? Smuchin works when the two psukim, or the two phrases, are mamish right next to each other. But if there's anything that interrupts, it's not smuchin. So Rabbi say, here's what's interesting about this model. The psukim are next to each other, but the topics are not. You have the topic of violating a woman, then the prohibition to take a father's wife, then the prohibition to uncover the corner of the father's garment. That phrase of taking the father's wife, says the Rabbanan, interrupt. They break up the smichos. That phrase breaks up the juxtaposition. So this is, it's like too much to handle. Because what's happening over here is as follows. Now what you begin to see is there's a double machlokas. There's a machlokas do darshan smuchin. Okay, fine, that's machlokas. Do you ascribe importance to juxtapositions? That's machlokas number one. Machlokas number two, I say, is then in how you darshan smuchin. Is it just enough if the psukim are next to each other, but the topics maybe are not exactly juxtaposed? Or no, do we say that the topics, mamish, need to be juxtaposed? You see from here, Rabbi Huda says, Rabbi Huda, who doesn't darshan smuchin in the rest of Torah, does darshan smuchin in chumash devarim, but yet, interestingly enough, we'll say it's smuchin as long as the psukim are next to each other, even if the topics are not right next to each other. And the Rabbanan say that no, to darshan smuchin, the topics need to be themselves directly juxtaposed. There can't be any intervening phrase. So we'll say, so according to the Rabbanan, what do you learn from the phrase of lo yigale knaf aviv? This is fascinating. Bishomeres yavam hakasov medaber. And we'll say, you know what it's talking about? This is fascinating. That's talking about a woman who is waiting for yibum for the father. In other words, we'll say, this is talking about a situation where the father has brothers, right? The father has brothers. One of the brothers passed away without children, and now the widow is waiting for yibum for the father. If the son has relations with, essentially, it's his aunt, right? He has relations with his aunt. Ultimately, again, who's waiting for yibum, I will say that's prohibited. And the additional phrase of lo yigale knaf aviv comes to go ahead and make the son in violation of tu lavin. If he has relations with the shomeres yavam, the woman waiting for yibum with his father, ultimately again two prohibitions. Okay, so Gemara says Mishnah Torah my time at the Darsh. So I'll say, so now what we've successfully done here, let's take stock. It's always good to take stock in life, right? Even in Yevamos Daf Dal, let's take stock. What do we have so far? So we'll say what we have over here is the notion of darshan and smuchin. Right? Do we darshan smuchin? Do we not darshan smuchin? So some say yes, some say no. But what have we established? Even those who say they don't darshan smuchin, everyone gets into the smuchin pool. Right? Everyone's in the smuchin water. When? Mishnah Torah chumash devarim. And we've proven that to Rabbi Huda. Even Rabbi Huda doesn't normally darshan smuchin, in devarim will. To which the Gemara says, by the way, or Mishnah Torah my time at Darsh. So why is devarim different? Right? Why? In other words, why is it, if you're not darshan smuchin in Kol Torah Kula, why are you darshan smuchin in Dvarim? To which the Gemara says, Ibay say mishum demuchach, v'ibay say mishum demufni. Well, this is very interesting. It could very well be because the psukim in Dvarim say, first of all, the simple answer is that chumash Dvarim in general is so dramatically different from all of the other chumashim. First of all, so much of it is a review. So because so much of it is a review, perhaps it gives us license to darshan things in a different way. That's kind of the backdrop to this. But the Gemara says, either because it's muchach, I will say, now what does muchach mean? Muchach means ultimately, again, it's clear, right? It's clear. Muchach means it's clear that it's there to be darshaned, or mufni. Mufni means it's open, it's available. Okay, let's explain this. What does it mean muchach? Dimkin lechatchila lichtevei rachmana gabi arayo. So we'll say, so for example, in this particular scenario over here, let the Torah go ahead and write this particular section of lo yikach ishes av lo yigala knaf aviv. Why don't you put that in the section of arayos, right? By achremos. Right? That's where this belongs. Dim K. Gemara says, Lichtov Rachmana, I'm sorry. Imke Lichtov Rachmana Gabi Arayos. Vibay say Mishum the Mufni. The Imke Lichtov Rachmana Lo Yikach Ish Es Aviv. Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv Lamali. And I will say furthermore again, it's Mufni. Mufni means it's a clearly extraneous phrase. As I will say, let the Torah just say, you cannot marry your father's wife. Why do you need that last phrase, Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv? Why do I need that phrase? Don't uncover the corner of my father's garment. Why is that phrase necessary? Amud Bezer will say, Shma Mina. What do I learn from here? La'afnuye. Ultimately, again, that is mufna. So we'll say it's interesting. What the Gemara is essentially saying is, in Chumash Devarim, you have a lot of these psukim that are quote unquote muchach or mufna. Muchach meaning it's clear that ultimately, again, you're meant to darshan it. How is it clear? Because Rabbi say it's clear because the psukim don't seem to belong here. Like in the case of Arayos, right? The case of the don't take your father's wife should have been stated in Chumash Vayikra and Achremos, right? Or it's mufni. Mufni means it's clearly extraneous. So you have a whole bunch of psukim like this in Vayikra that are muchach or mufni, which then allows them to be darshaned. The gabe tzitzis nami iba yisem shun the muchach. I will say, let's go back to where this all began. I will say, how did this start? This all started by tzitzis, right? I will say, the entire discussion, this is really fascinating, the entire discussion by asay docha lo sasay. I remember again, I will say, just so you remember, how do we get to this? This is such an exciting journey, sometimes we forget where it began, right? How do we get to this? We got to this because of the idea that Yibum itself is an asay docha lo sasay. Right, that's how Yibum works, right? There's an assay of Yibum, that's docha lo saseh of what? Marrying my brother's wife. Where do we learn how to say docha lo saseh? Where does that come from? Tzitzis and shatnis. But how do you know that the assay is docha the lo saseh? Right, that the assay of tzitzis is docha the lo saseh of shatnis? Darshinan smuchin. Only because, I'll say like it's multiple steps, only because we darshin juxtaposed psukim. That's the way that it works. To which the Gemara says, "V'gabe tzitzis nami." They will say, now how do you know to darshan tzitzis? How do I know to make that drasha? How do I know to make that? And I will say, by the way, it's a huge drasha that the juxtaposition of tzitzis to shatnis teaches me that tzitzis is allowed to be shatnis. How do I know to make that drasha? To which the Gemara says, here we go. They will say either because it is clear and explicit that the pasuk lends itself to be darshaned, or because it's clearly extraneous. Maybe because it's clear and apparent. I'll say, by the way, I will say, where does that pasuk appear? It appears in Chumash Bamidbar. I will say, ultimately, again, the psukim that we're quoting over here of the juxtaposition of tzitzis to shatnis appears in Chumash Devarim. Why are you bringing down the pasuk of Gedilin Taselach? Why is that in Chumash Devarim? The parasha of tzitzis is in Chumash Bamidbar. What is it doing here? So I will say, the fact that you're talking about tzitzis again, out of context means it's muchach. It's clear that what does the Ribono Shel Olam want us to do? What does he want us to do? See, he wants us to darshan the juxtaposition of tzitzis to shatnis and tell us that tzitzis can be supposed to say, isn't it incredible? So much of life, I'm trying to figure out, what does Hashem want me to do? What does Hashem want me to do? And sometimes it's so clear what Hashem wants me to do. When I find the pasuk of tzitzis juxtaposed to a pasuk of shatnis in Chumash Devarim, it is clear that Hashem wants me to do is darshan the kishkas out of it, right? And go ahead and understand that the juxtaposition teaches me that tzitzis is allowed to be shatnis. Otherwise, what is a pasuk of tzitzis doing out of context? What is it doing here in Chumash Devarim when the parsha of tzitzis itself is in Chumash Bamidbar? And I will say furthermore again. So I'm sorry. We'll say why is it here? So muchach means it's apparent. It's apparent that ultimately, again, I'm supposed to darshan the juxtaposition of tzitzis to shatnez, because why is the Torah putting tzitzis? Why is the Torah mentioning tzitzis here in Chumash Devarim when the section of tzitzis is in Chumash Bamidbar? Furthermore, again, I will say the other possibility is that halacha l'maisa it's mufna. Mufna means it's extraneous. How is it extraneous? Here we go. Michtek siv ubegit kilayim shatnez lo ya'ale alecha. I will say the Torah already stated in Vayikra. Beged kilayim shatnez lo ya'ale alecha. You cannot wear a beged of shatnez. We already spoke about it. We already said it. So the Gemara says, lo silba shatnez lamali. Why do I need this additional pasuk of shatnez in Chumash Vayikra? In the Chumash Devarim, excuse me. Shemami no lafnuye. Ultimately, again, I will say, therefore, it tells me what? It comes to free up the pasuk. And what does freeing up the pasuk do? It allows me to darshan juxtaposition of shatnez, ultimately again to tzitzis, and to say shatnez is normally asr, except where? By tzitzis. So I will say, so what an incredible and overwhelming, beautiful, magnificent, cathartic limud. Right? So I will say, all begins, again, just remember, the reason why this is relevant to us is because all of Yibum is predicated on the halachic construct of aseh docha lo saseh. That's how it works. A positive commandment is docha lo saseh. That concept is learned from tzitzis and shatnez. Tzitzis and shatnez is learned from the fact darshin and smuchin, we darshin juxtapositions. How do you know you darshin juxtapositions? Either we'll say because it's muchach or it's mufna. Either because it's apparent, right? At least in the context of tzitzis, it's apparent because the parasha of tzitzis is in Bamidbar. Why are you repeating this over here? Or it's mufna because the entire pasuk of shatnez is fundamentally extraneous. Because shatnez was already taught to us in Chumash Vayikra. Shabbos said the Gemara now is going to go on a little bit of a shatnez tangent. The Gemara says, 1 second. Hani mitzvach tzrichi. It's not true. The psukim of shatnez are actually not extraneous. They're not extraneous at all. Had the Torah just said you shouldn't wear shatnez, or I should say lo ya'ale alecha, which means literally what? Shatnez should not come upon you. Had the Torah said that, hava amina kol derech hala asr rachmana va'afilu mochrei ksus. They will say you might have thought like this. So also we've had this many times. You know, clothing sellers, how would they often hock their wares? They'd wear it, right? They'd have it on them. So I will say, what about if the clothing seller has some wool garments, some linen garments, and they're all on top of him? You might have thought that would be aser. Because we'll say, it says, lo ya'ale alecha. Lo ya'ale sounds like what? It can't be on you in any way, shape, or form. Which sounds like even the salespeople can't go ahead and have the multiple wool and linen garments on top of them. Therefore, I will say, what does the Torah say? Kazer rachmana lo silbash. Torah says you can't wear shatnez. Dumya de levisha de isbe hana. So I will say, ultimately, again, lo silbash teaches us that what? The prohibition of shatnez, I will say, is to what? Is derech levisha. Derech levisha is in a normative manner of wearing. That's what's asr. But let's say, I will say, if you're a clothing salesman and you just want to put layers of clothing on top of you to hock your wares, is that mutter or asr? Mutter. Because that's not derech levisha. Because of Rachmana lo silbash. And if the Torah would have just said lo silbash, hava mina dafka levisha denafesh haniyasa, I might have thought that it's only actual wearing that's problematic when it comes to shatnez. Why? Because that's where you have the greatest amount of hana. Aval ha'alo lo. But I will say, just allowing shatnez to be on top of you, that's not problematic. So I'll give you an example of this. Let's say a shatnez cover. Right? Can you put a shatnez cover on top of you? You might have thought that should be mutter because that's not called levisha. Kazav rachmana lo ya'ale alecha. No, it's not true. Even a shatnez cover is problematic. Lo ya'ale alecha means even having shatnez upon you ultimately is problematic. So we'll say, what do you see from here? The Gemara wanted to say that we can darshan the psukim of, or the juxtaposition of shatnez to tzitzis, because the pasuk of shatnez is extra. It's extra. To which the Gemara says, it's not extra. It's not extra at all. In other words, I have two psukim by shatnez. One says, beged kilayim lo ya'ale alecha, and one says, lo silbash. And they're both necessary. Because had I just had one of them, that would lead me to an erroneous result. So the psukim are not extra at all. To which the Gemara says, you're right. But imkain, lichtov rachbana lo silbash shatniz semer ufishtim lamali. You're right, I will say, but still, the pasuk itself is still extra. Because it could have just said in Dvarim, lo silbash shatniz, don't wear shatniz. Why do you also have to put in there semer ufishtim? I was say, I already know what shatniz is. Why do you have to put in there wool and linen? Michti, siv, kasav, ubeged, kilayim, shatniz, lo ya'ale alecha. The Torah already said that a beged, kilayim of shatniz mixture, lo ya'ale alecha. But turn to Rabbi Shmuel, hoil v'nemru b'Torah stam begadim, uparat lecha, kasav, bechel, and semer ufishtim, af kol semer ufishtim. They both say this is another incredible idea. Rabbi Shmuel says like this, the Torah often uses the word begadim, stam, just uses the word beged, without telling me what beged actually is. And in one place, the Torah says, what's beged? Semer ufishtim. So I will say, what does that do? That creates a paradigm or a binyan after teaching me. Af kol semer ufishtim. Any time you see the word beged, I will say, what does de facto beged mean? What does beged mean? Wool and linen, semer ufishtim. Semer ufishtim, l'kasar rachman olam. So I will say, if that's the case, then by the pasuk of shatniz in Dvarim, you have an extraneous phrase. Because what does the pasuk say? Lo silbash shatniz semer ufishtim yachdav. That's the pasuk in shatniz in Devarim right before tzitzis. In other words, once you tell me ultimately shatniz, or you tell me beged, I know that that's wool and linen. Why do you need to say wool and linen again? Why wool and linen again? To which the Gemara shmamina lafnuye. Oh, they will say that comes to make the pasuk extraneous, so to speak. And once it's extraneous in Devarim, extra, mufneh. Once it's open, once it's superfluous, then Allah l'maisa, I could dash and smuch and I could dash in juxtapositions to tzitzis. 1 second. V'akati itzterich. I still need it. I'll tell you why. Sagadai tchamina, ha'allah hidalo, nafesh haniyasa, aval levisha, denafesh haniyasa, kol trimine asarachmana. Wow. I'm going to throw, I will say it's like this. When it comes to wearing, I should say differently. When it comes to just having, when it comes to wearing, when it comes to having something on you, I might have thought that that's dafka when shatnez applies wool and linen. But when it comes to wearing, which is an intense form of hana, of benefit, listen to this, I might have thought you're not allowed to combine any two types of fabrics. In other words, I will say maybe shatnez, wool and linen, is even on garments that ultimately, again, are just going to kind of rest on you. But when it comes to wearing, which is a more intense form of hana, maybe what? Maybe halacha l'maisa, any two fabrics combined is going to be aser. Kasav rachmana semer ufishtim. Therefore, the Torah writes semer ufishtim. Im kain lishtok kra minei v'tisi shatnez meha Allah. Ultimately, again, if that's the case, the pasuk doesn't have to say anything and just make a gzera shavav shatnez from ha'Allah. V'tani be'Rebbe Shmuel. Time of the Kasav Rachmanat Semer Ufishtim. The reason ultimately the Kasav said Semer Ufishtim. Halav hachi kilayim b'tzitzis havamina da Asar Rachmana. So say according to Rebbe Shmuel, they say the only reason that tzitzis is allowed to be shatnez is why? Is because halacha l'maisa the Torah writes Semer Ufishtim. Had it not said Semer Ufishtim, I might have thought that what? I might have thought that halacha l'maisa shatnez is asr in tzitzis. Is that true? V'aksiv v'asu lahem tzitzis al kanfei vigdeihem. The pasuk says you shall make tzitzis on the corner of your garment. I will say, watch this. V'tan Rebbe Shmuel kol begadim semer ufishtim heim. I will say, remember again, like we said before, in general, whenever you see the word beged in the Torah, beged always means what? Semer ufishtim, wool and linen. Now watch this. V'amar Rachmana avid le tcheles utcheles amru. Now both say the Torah says, go ahead. Now both say beged doesn't have to mean a garment of semer and fishtim. It could just mean a beged of wool or linen. So you have beged. The Torah says you're supposed to make tzitzis on the corner of your beged, and the Torah says what else do you put on the corner of your beged? Tcheles. What is tcheles made from? Tcheles amru. Tcheles is wool. Tcheles is wool dyed, blue dyed wool. So we'll say, the tcheles amru. How do you know that tcheles is in fact wool? So the Gemara says, mideshesh kisna utcheles amruhu. So we'll say from the fact ultimately again that ultimately that sheish, we'll say the Torah uses the word sheish by big dekuna. Sheish is linen, tcheles is wool. So for the fact that ultimately again, Rabbi, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Let's go back. Let's go back for just a moment because I don't want to rush through this last sugya. Tani Rabbi Shmuel. So we'll say Tani Rabbi Shmuel is now a new twist on this sugya. So let's pause here for just a moment. So we'll say here's what we have so far, just to follow the simple progression. We started today by saying that halacha l'maisa again, yibum is learned out from the concept, or the concept of yibum is predicated on asay docha lo saseh. Right? Now again, that only goes so far, because asay docha lo saseh will not let you do what? Not let you do yibum with who? With who? With an erva. Right? Specifically again, that's learned out from where? Achos ishto. Right? So even though asay docha lo saseh by yibum, it doesn't go so far to allow an erva punishable by kares. So that's achos ishto, and then all other ervas learned out by achos ishto. Where do we learn out asay docha lo saseh from? Let's go through this. Where do we learn out from? Tzitzis. Juxtaposition of tzitzis to shatnez in chumash devarim. Now, I will say it's not just asay docha lo saseh, but how do you know to combine those psukim? And what's the answer? The mechanism we call smuchin. Smuchin. Then a machlokes. 1 second. Do you darshan smuchin? Not darshan smuchin. To which we essentially said that what? That halacha l'maisa, even those who don't darshan smuchin. Who is the chief smuchin antagonist? Rabbi Yehuda. Even he, that's probably a little bit strong, which I understand, right? Even Rabbi Yehuda, ultimately again goes in and says, when do we darshan smuchin? Ultimately again in chumash devar. They both say that's the entire daf. That's the entire daf. The rest of it is just again the explanations and the back and forth. And Tanakh Rabbi Shua is now going to use this entire discussion to launch into a discussion about tzitzis. I just want to end off with what I saw, which is just an incredibly beautiful, overwhelming yisod. In the hashkafa of asay docha lo saseh, there's something absolutely beautiful. I will say hashkafically, why do we say that an asay is docha lo saseh? Right? Why should a positive commandment be docha lo saseh, a prohibition? So I will say in the Sefer Noam Begadim, Sefer Noam Begadim says something beautiful. Also listen to this. He says, Datam, what's the reason why an asay hashkafically? Halachically, I know. Hashkafically, why does a positive commandment set aside a prohibition? So listen to his lashon. In the Mikos Gemara Maseches Kiddushin, Arminon de machshava tova HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfa l'maisa. Ultimately, again, also when it comes to a mitzvah, the desire to do a mitzvah in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is as significant as the actual Maisa Mitzvah. In other words, you get credit. You get credit for your Maisa Mitzvah. You get credit for the machshava, for the willingness, the desire ultimately again to do a mitzvah. Ava machshava ra'ah. But I will say when it comes ultimately again to go ahead and have a desire to do an aveira, a machshava ra'ah, a negative thought to do an aveira, ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maisa. I will say that Baruch Hashem, a million times over. Right? The Ribbono Shel Olam does not count the desire to do an aveira like the actual commission to do an aveira as well. Nimtza de b'mitzvah b'choshev lasos mitzvah havi ki'ilu asa v'yim kein yesh gam mitzvos hamachshava. Therefore, say it turns out that with a mitzvah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says desire to do a mitzvah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu counts it like what? Ultimately, again, like an actual Maisa Mitzvah. So now I want to be clear. It doesn't mean that all you have to do all day is think about mitzvahs. And say, wonderful, shkoyach to me. What it means, I will say, is that a person has a desire to do a mitzvah, and for some reason is precluded from doing so. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzaref the das l'machshava. The Ribbono Shel Olam says the desire to do a mitzvah, he looks at what do we yearn for? What do we want? What do we want to be? What are my she'ifas? What am I yearning for in life? And if I yearn to do mitzvahs, that counts for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Masha'enkin below saseh. But with Averas, that's not the case. With Averas, all HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at is not what I'm thinking. Thank God. All he looks at is what? At what? What I do. Therefore, says the Noam Begadim, says, Ubazeh, Gadol koach shala mitzvos aseh, lidchos lo saseh. Noam Begadim says, from here you see why an aseh has the ability to be docha lo saseh. Because an aseh, a positive commandment, is so much stronger than a lo saseh. Why? Because the aseh has the ability ultimately to count towards a mitzvah, even when what? Even when it's only b'machshava. But a lo saseh, Baruch Hashem, we're only held accountable for when? at the end of the day when we actually execute. That's why asay is dochelos asay, says the Noam Megadim, which Rabbosai tells us something so incredibly profound and beautiful, which is that sometimes in life, I can't always do the right thing, but wanting to do the right thing, a desire to be greater, a desire to be holier, a desire to do the asay, counts for so much in the eyes of the Ribbon Shalom. V'haraya, that desire translates halachically as well into the principle of asay dochelos asay. Shleimah Rabbosai. All right, Chavra on Zoom, good Shabbos everyone. Reb Jerry, great to see you in Eretz Yisrael. Reb Moshe, Shabbos everyone. Amen. Beautiful. That's right.